Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Sunday. Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Sunday? Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Renee in Indiana. What happens is, as I'm reading it, a new one comes in and the feed jumps, and then I have to find my place again. Renee in Indiana, Shandor in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Leona in Illinois, Susie in Southern California, Bet in Massachusetts, John in Maine, Joseph in Massachusetts, Joe in the Inland Empire, Belle and Bet. I love it. We have Belle and Bet in the house. Sharon says, I've been sick all afternoon. Hope I can keep it all together. May you have a refuah shlema, Sharon. We say amen. Marjorie from Georgia. Ella says, shalom. Welcome, everybody. Today's daf is page Lamed, page 30, here in Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud. And with this page, God willing, we will finish chapter 5. I would say that the first half of today's class, challenging, as the sages dive in and explain these nuances between first, second, third, fourth, and there's even a mention of fifth degree tuma, ritual impurity today. Why are we even talking about that? Because as we've seen, this tractate is about the laws of the suspected adulteress. And here in chapter 5, we learned that just as the suspected adulteress is treated stringently, we don't know for sure whether she committed adultery or not. She was warned not to seclude herself with a particular man in front of witnesses by her husband. And then she secluded herself with that man. And that was witnessed. And so at that point, she becomes the Sotah, the suspected adulteress, and only she and her lover know for sure if they committed adultery. But in the meantime, once she becomes a Sotah, her husband and she are prohibited to each other. They're either going to have to divorce, or if the temple is standing in Jerusalem, as it was until about 2,000 years ago, they can go there. She drinks the bitter water. If she's innocent, she'll be fine. That will prove her innocence, and then the husband and wife will be permitted to each other again. If she's guilty, the bitter water, which contains just some ink from the verses of the Torah about the Sotah that are dissolved into that water, some dirt from the floor of the temple, and a little bit of wormwood just to give it that bitter taste. So there's no reason why it would harm her, but if she's guilty, miraculously it will kill her, and it will kill her lover as well. Both of them are evaluated by the bitter water. So we see that in this case of uncertainty, at least vis-a-vis herself and her husband, until she drinks the bitter water or they divorce, the case is treated stringently. And the sages learned out from that that in cases of ritual impurity, so if, for example, there was a pile of food that was consecrated as teruma to be given to the priests, so only a priest could eat that consecrated food, only priests can eat teruma, and both the teruma and the priest must be in a state of ritual purity, tahara. And then what if we're not sure? Like maybe that food came into contact with a source of tuma, of ritual impurity, and maybe it didn't. So we learn out from the Sotah that we're going to treat this case of uncertainty stringently and treat that food as prohibited. The priest cannot eat it as if it were certainly pure. But we're going to limit the application of that law to cases that are somehow like the case of the Sotah. And so as we saw, there's going to be this idea that that if it happens in the public domain, we're going to be more lenient than if it happens in the private domain, just as the case of the Sotah and her lover. whether or not the adultery actually happened, it would have happened in the private domain. So cases of uncertain tuma are going to be ruled stringently in the private domain and leniently in the public domain. And also we're going to make a distinction on if the entity in question has the ability to be aware of whether it is tameh or not. And so we're going to make a distinction between whether the priest is of uncertain ritual purity, in which case we're going to rule stringently, versus if the teruma, right, just this object, this food, has uncertain purity, which the teruma has no ability, has no awareness, it's not sentient, and there, unlike the sotah, we're going to be more lenient. That's where our discussion has brought us. And we also learn here in chapter 5 that when these laws were discussed on that day in history, when Elazar ben Azariah became the head of the Sanhedrin and threw open the doors of the study hall of the Sanhedrin, and more prospective, aspiring sages were allowed into the study hall, and new teachings were allowed on that day, that Rabbi Akiva brought a teaching about the Sotah, about this extension of that law into the realm of ritual purity and impurity, and then a couple of other laws as well that have nothing to do with the Sotah, but they were taught on that day. So we're continuing to learn about those here in this Mishna number 1 of chapter 5, which, God willing, we will complete today. So continuing the discussion of these nuanced differences between which kind of ritual impurity, tuma, can be transferred from one person or one entity to another. Rabbi Asi said that, and we picked this up a couple paragraphs down from the top of page 30a. Rabbi Asi said that Rav said, and some say Rabbi ben Isi said, that Rav said, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Eliezer all hold that an item of second degree ritual impurity status cannot impart third degree ritual impurity status to non-sacred items. And Ra proceeds to prove this by attributing support from the rulings of each of these Tanaim, these rabbis of the Mishnah. As I said, in the first half of today, we're going to be dealing with these very nuanced aspects of Tum and Tahara. And then in the second half, we're going to move into some new ideas also brought down on that day when Elazar ben Azariah opened the doors of the study hall, but more in the realm of Agadata, really interesting stories and teachings that are sort of easier to translate on a spiritual level to life in the modern world. Okay, so Rabbi Meir is of this opinion. As we learned in a Mishnah, Para 11.5, anything that requires immersion in water by rabbinic law renders sacrificial food impure upon contact with second-degree impurity and disqualifies teruma, meaning that it renders the teruma itself impure, but not to the extent that the teruma can render other teruma impure. Now, one sort of principle that we'll see over and over again here is that it is going to be easier to disqualify teruma than it is to render non-sacred food impure. Right? In other words, the holiness of consecrated food is, of course, is more elevated than of non-sacred food, and so because it's at a more elevated level of holiness, it can be disqualified easier, right? We have to holiness means set apart. And so it has to be set apart further, as it were. It's going to be easier. In other words, something with second degree impurity, if it comes into contact with teruma, it will disqualify the teruma. Whereas something with second degree impurity that is non-sacred food that touches other non-sacred food is not going to render it impure because it's already at a lower state and it's sort of tougher, as it were, right? Things that are at a higher sacred state are more delicate in terms of maintaining their qualified sacred status. Right, so Rabbi Meir is of the opinion, as we learned in that Mishnah, that anything that requires immersion in water by rabbinic law renders sacrificial food impure upon contact with second-degree impurity and disqualifies teruma. And anything that requires immersion in water by rabbinic law is permitted for non-sacred food and for the second tithe, i.e. it does not render these items impure. Right, so first tithe, Meiser, that passes to the very first tithe, is teruma, right? That goes to the priest. Then first tithe goes to the Levite. It doesn't have to be maintained at a level of a sacred state of ritual purity in order for a Levite to eat it, unlike a priest, but it's still of a higher order. And then second tithe just means that a person sets it aside for himself. A regular Yisrael can set aside second tithe for himself when the temple is standing. He's going to make that pilgrimage on the festivals to go up to Jerusalem. Second tithe is for him to use and enjoy during that pilgrimage, or in certain years it's given to the poor. That's second tithe. And this is the statement of Rabbi Meir. But the rabbis prohibit one who has this degree of impurity from partaking of the second tithe. Now, from the fact that Rabbi Meir permits him to partake of the second tithe, it is inferred that he maintains that an item of second degree impurity cannot impart third degree impurity upon non-sacred items. Generally speaking, third degree impurity is about disqualifying teruma or other consecrated items. And fourth degree impurity is where you have somebody that is lacking atonement is still able to disqualify sacrificial offerings. Now, it is evident that Rabbi Yosef is of this opinion from that which we have stated above, that he derives that sacrificial food, right? So, for example, a sin offering, which some of it is burned on the altar and some of it is eaten by the priests. Again, this only applies when the temple is standing. Rabbi Yosef is of the opinion that which you have stated above, that he derives that sacrificial food can contract fourth degree impurity, because if he holds that non-sacred items can contract third degree impurity, he should have derived through his kal v'chomer inference that there is fourth degree impurity vis-a-vis teruma and fifth degree impurity vis-a-vis sacrificial food, since each of these categories has a unique level of impurity. Rabbi Yehoshua is of this opinion, as we learned in a Mishna, in Taharos 2:2. Rabbi Eliezer says one who eats food with first degree impurity, like for instance, a sheretz fell into produce, a dead creeping thing fell into produce, that's first degree impurity. Right, one who eats food with first degree impurity assumes first degree impurity. The one who eats something with first degree impurity becomes a source of first degree impurity. One who eats food with second degree impurity assumes second degree impurity. One who eats food with third degree impurity assumes third degree impurity. Rabbi Yehoshua says one who eats food with first degree impurity or food with second degree impurity assumes second degree impurity. One who eats food with third degree impurity assumes second degree impurity vis-a-vis sacrificial food, and he does not assume second degree impurity vis-a-vis teruma. Don't worry if you can't keep track of every nuance of every sage. Just bear with us. Now, eating an item with third degree impurity is possible only in the case of non-sacred items, as eating impure teruma or sacrificial food is prohibited. Now, can you see why that would be? Right? Who can eat impure teruma? Nobody. Because only priests are allowed to eat teruma. Only priests are allowed to eat the edible portion of sacrificial offerings. And priests are required that they be in a state of ritual purity, and the food, either the teruma or the edible portion of the sacrificial offering, that it be in a state of purity. So nobody can eat impure teruma or impure sacrificial offerings. Therefore, the case of one who eats food with third degree impurity refers specifically to non-sacred food items that were prepared as if their level of purity were on the level of the purity of teruma. And by means of a vow, one can establish the purity status of non-sacred food items to be treated on the level of purity necessary for teruma. We learned elsewhere in the Talmud that there were individuals, sages usually, Torah scholars, almost certainly, who sort of held themselves to a higher degree of sanctity than was required. In a sense, a little bit like a Nazir, except that this kind of vow is not spelled out in the Torah the way the vow of the Nazir is. But these people would say, I'm only going to eat food in a state of purity. So they're going to hold themselves to the standards that priests hold themselves to with regard to eating teruma, even though these particular individuals are, are a Yisrael or a Levite, and they're not required to do this, but they take a vow that they will do this. So that's where non-sacred food might be treated as if it were teruma. And another place where we see this is challah. Okay, so challah, not about this vow, but as we'll see, holding something up to a standard, where there's a transaction between a non-priest and a priest. So challah, right, when we hear challah, we're thinking about the bread that we eat on Friday nights. Now it's called challah because when it's made, usually Jewish women are making it for their households or bakers are making it to sell. So the reason it's called challah is because it has challah removed, meaning that when the dough is prepared and before it is baked, the woman who's making it or the baker who's making it is going to remove a portion of the dough and set it aside. Now, in ancient times, there was a requirement that this would be handed to a priest, and that was like a tithe for the priests. That whenever we would make bread, we would set aside a portion and give it to a priest. 1/24 of the dough being baked by a private individual, like a mom in her home, or 1/48 of the dough when a baker is doing it in a professional capacity. Now these days, because we are all assumed to be ritually impure, as we're walking around in the world and we don't have the temple and we don't have to go into all of that, but the bottom line is there are Kohanim, right? There are priests in the world. Usually anyone named Cohen or Rappaport, there's a few other names. But, if you're a Cohen, you're a Cohen. Your dad was a Cohen and he told you that you're a Cohen. So you might think that you could give the challah to a priest, to a Cohen. But you don't, because even the Kohanim are in a state of ritual impurity, so they couldn't eat the challah. And that's why what we do now is we burn it so that we're treating it respectfully and we don't just throw away that challah, we burn it. Now, the Torah commands the separation of a portion of one's dough, which is declared as challah and is later given to the priests. And this portion of challah is governed by all the laws pertaining to teruma, the portion of produce set aside for the priests. Challah must be taken from all dough made from any of the 5 types of grain, provided that the quantity of flour of the batch is at least 1/10 of an ephah in volume. If challah is not taken, the dough has the status of untithed produce and may not be eaten. Now, the Torah does not specify a measure of challah, but the sages derived that, as I mentioned before. And nowadays, as all Jews are assumed to be ritually impure, challah is governed by laws similar to impure teruma. It cannot be eaten and therefore it must be burned. According to the measures mentioned above, no longer apply. Only a small portion is separated from the dough and burned, and the rest of the dough that may then be used. A blessing is recited for the separation of challah, and the laws of this mitzvah, which is one of the mitzvahs performed particularly by women, are discussed comprehensively in Tractate Challah. Now we'll see how this becomes relevant. Now, the Gemara infers from Rabbi Yehoshua's statement that yes, one is able to prepare items as if their level of purity were on the level of the purity of teruma, but one is not able to prepare items as if their level of purity were on the level of the purity of sacrificial food, and such items would not contract third-degree impurity. So the Gemara concludes, apparently Rabbi Yehoshua holds that an item of second-degree impurity cannot impart third-degree impurity upon ordinary non-sacred items that were not prepared on the level of the purity of teruma, as if one took a vow to that effect. What's going on here? Okay, very good. Now, with regard to sacrificial food, such an item renders impure 2 additional levels of contact, enabling the items that contracted ritual impurity from it to transfer that impurity to items that they in turn touch afterward. And it disqualifies 1 level afterward, imparting upon the food 4th-degree impurity, which cannot impart impurity to a 5th item. Now, with regard to teruma, An item of first degree impurity renders impure one additional level of contact, i.e. it imparts second level impurity to teruma food with which it comes into contact, and that item in turn disqualifies one additional level afterward, as the teruma food imparts third degree impurity upon other teruma. And with regard to non-sacred food, an item of first degree impurity merely disqualifies one additional level of non-sacred food. Evidently, non-sacred items cannot go beyond a second degree impurity. Now, Rabbi Eliezer also agrees with this principle, as we learned in a Mishnah about challah. Rabbi Eliezer says challah can be taken from ritually pure dough that is tahor, on behalf of ritually impure dough. Why would you do that? Because if you're going to give challah, right, that portion that's set aside for priests, as was done when the temple was standing, and priests are going to be bound by the same laws with regard to this challah as they are with regard to teruma. So the challah has to be in a state of ritual purity for the priest to be able to eat it. So if you've got dough that became ritually impure, a non-priest can eat that. But you can't separate dough from it as the challah portion and give that to the priest, because he can't eat ritually impure food. So if you've got two piles of dough and one became impure but the other stayed pure, you could remove a little extra challah from the dough that remained pure on behalf of the dough that became impure. Rabbi Eliezer says challah can be taken from ritually pure dough on behalf of ritually impure dough. How so? If there are two batches of dough, one of which is pure and one of which is impure, one takes the required amount of dough for separating challah from both of the batches, from the pure dough, when its challah has not yet been separated for itself, and then places less than an egg bulk of dough, which is not susceptible to become ritually impure due to its size, in the middle, between the impure dough and the pure dough that is set aside for being used as the separated challah. And this joins all of the dough together so that one can fulfill the requirement to take dough for separating challah from dough that is situated near the dough that it comes to exempt. Now we're on page 30b. And the rabbis prohibit separating challah in this manner. And it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer even allows the ritually pure dough placed in the middle to be as large as an egg bulk, even though dough of that size is susceptible to the laws of ritual impurity. Now, there is a dispute between Rashi and Tosafos, meaning Rashi and his grandsons and their contemporaries, about whether this egg bulk is the minimum measure necessary for food to contract ritual impurity, or whether it's the minimum measure for food to be able to transmit ritual impurity. I'll save that debate for another day. Now, the Gemara explains the reasoning of those who try to prove from here that Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that second degree ritual impurity cannot impart third degree ritual impurity upon non-sacred items. And they assume that both this Mishnah and this baraisa are referring to cases where the dough is of first degree impurity. And furthermore, they assume that all the Tanaim agree that non-sacred food that is untithed with regard to the obligation to separate challah, as its challah has not yet been separated, is not treated like challah as far as its ability to contract third degree ritual impurity. Rather, it is regarded as generic non-sacred food, which is susceptible only to second degree impurity. Right? When we talk about the dough and the challah, remember, challah doesn't mean the bread we eat on Friday nights. In the Talmud, challah means the portion of dough that is separated to give to the priest. Based on these assumptions, the Gemara explains how these authorities understood the dispute between the Tanaim. What? Is it not clear that Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis disagree with regard to the following matter? One sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that an item of second degree impurity cannot impart third-degree impurity to non-sacred items. Therefore, there is no problem placing an egg bulk of pure dough in the middle, as although it will touch the impure dough and will thereby contract second-degree impurity, nevertheless, it is unable to transmit impurity to the pure dough. And the other sage, meaning the rabbis, the majority who disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer, holds that an item of second-degree impurity can impart third-degree ritual impurity to non-sacred items. They therefore prohibit placing an egg bulk of dough in the middle, as it will assume second-degree impurity status, which in their opinion can impart third-degree impurity status upon the pure dough. Now, Rab Mari, the son of Rav Kahana, said that the dispute can be understood differently. Everyone agrees that an item of second-degree ritual impurity cannot impart third-degree ritual impurity to non-sacred items. But here, the dispute concerns a different matter, as they disagree with regard to the status of non-sacred food that is untithed vis-a-vis challah, as its challah has not yet been separated. One sage, meaning the rabbis, holds that it is treated like challah with regard to its ability to contract third-degree impurity, and the other sage, meaning Rabbi Eliezer, holds that it is not treated like challah and cannot contract third-degree impurity. Therefore, he permits separating challah in this manner. And if you wish, say instead that they disagree with regard to a different issue. Everyone agrees that non-sacred food that is untithed with regard to challah is not treated like challah and cannot contract third-degree impurity, and that an item of second-degree ritual impurity cannot impart third-degree ritual impurity to non-sacred items. But here, they disagree with regard to whether or not it is permitted to cause ritual impurity to non-sacred food that is in the land of Israel. That's an odd thing. Why would they prohibit that, right? A non-priest who is a Jew can eat non-sacred food that has been rendered impure. But nevertheless, we don't want to allow on purpose that non-sacred food to become impure. Now, one sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that it is permitted to cause impurity to non-sacred food that is in the land of Israel. Therefore, since the dough placed in the middle cannot impart third-degree ritual impurity status upon the dough designated for challah, there is no reason to prohibit doing so. And the other sage, meaning the rabbis, the majority, holds that it is prohibited to cause impurity to non-sacred food that is in the land of Israel. Therefore, although the dough of the ritually pure batch will not become impure, nevertheless, the rabbis prohibit separating challah in this manner, as causing the dough in the middle to become impure is prohibited. Next topic. It is stated in our Mishna, Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 5. On that same day, right, the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah opened up the doors of the study hall, on that same day, Rabbi Akiva interpreted one of the contradictory verses with regard to the amount of land surrounding the Levite cities as teaching that one may not travel beyond a 2,000 cubit radius around his city limits on Shabbos. We saw that when the Torah spells out that the tribe of Levi is not going to receive a portion in the land of Israel like the other tribes, right? There's a region of Israel called Judah. There's a region called Benjamin. There's a region called Issachar. There's a region called Zebulun, etc. There's no region called Levi. Why? Because the Levites, their portion was God, and God is their portion, and they're going to assist the Kohanim in the divine service. They're going to receive a tithe from all the other tribes to support themselves. And where are they going to live? In cities, the Levitical cities. And the Torah mentioned that there would be a ring, so to speak, around each of the Levitical cities. And then that ring, it seems to say in one verse it's going to be 1,000 cubits wide, and in a subsequent verse that it's going to be 2,000 cubits wide. So which is it? Is it 1,000 or is it 2,000 or is it the sum of 1 and 2,000 so that it's 3,000? The sages dispute this. Rabbi Akiva seems to be saying that no, the ring is 1,000 cubits wide, and this other measurement referencing 2,000 cubits, this is actually the source for the law that, as we learned in Tractate Shabbos and Tractate Eruvin in the beginning of our journey, that on Shabbos, once a person reaches the edge of the city in which his house is located, he then can only travel 2,000 cubits further. And that's his techum boundary, right? That's the limit of how far a person can walk on Shabbos. If you live in a very large city, it might be that you can walk for miles and miles and miles before you leave the edge of the city. If you don't live in a city, then you can only walk 2,000 cubits from your house that you have established as your dwelling for Shabbos. So from this teaching, Rabbi Akiva is saying, right, you get 2,000 cubits from the edge of the city. And this is the verse referring to the Levitical cities from which we learn that more general rule that doesn't apply just to Levites, but to everybody. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to what halachic matter do they disagree? Who's disagreeing? Right, Rabbi Akiva interpreted this about the Levitical cities. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, on the other hand, interpreted the contradictory verses about 1,000 and 2,000 cubits as referring to different types of land that are left for the Levites around their cities. Right, he said that the 1,000 cubit band is I forget what it was, but maybe you have to leave that open, like park, sort of like open parkland, and then the 2,000 cubits is where Levites can own, they can purchase and farm fields and orchards near their city. A very different interpretation of the 2,000 cubit measurement than what Rabbi Akiva held. So the Gemara asks, with regard to what halakhic legal matter do they disagree? And the Gemara answers, one sage, Rabbi Akiva, holds that the law of Shabbos boundaries is mandated by Torah law, as he bases it on a verse. And the other sage, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, holds that the law of Shabbos boundaries is mandated by rabbinic decree, and therefore derives other matters from that verse. Now, the sages taught, and we're going to leave that discussion there. Now, back to our Mishnah here in chapter 5. And the sages taught that on that same day that Rabbi Akiva taught that at the time that the Jewish people ascended from the split sea, right, when we left Egypt and the sea parted, the Red Sea, and we walked through it on dry land, that at that time, the Jewish people set their eyes on reciting a song of gratitude to God, right? We call that the song at the sea, and we recite it every day in our daily prayers. And especially we talked about it near Passover when we celebrated the Exodus from Egypt. Now, in the same manner, so Rabbi Akiva is now going to give us a teaching about how the Jewish people, how the children of Israel sang the song at the sea. And how did they recite this song of gratitude? In the same manner, says Rabbi Akiva, as an adult man reciting Hallel on behalf of a congregation in a synagogue, as his reading enables all who hear to fulfill their obligation. And the congregation listening merely recite after him the chapter headings of Hallel. So too, at the sea, when the children of Israel emerged from Egypt, Moses said, I will sing unto the Lord. And the people repeated after Moses, I will sing unto the Lord. Moses continued and said, for he is highly exalted. And they said once again, I will sing unto the Lord. And so Moses said each line of the song at the sea, and God drowned Pharaoh and his chariots and saved us, etc. And after each verse that Moses would recite to the people, and he didn't have a PA system, so either his voice carried miraculously to all 2 million people that were assembled there, which certainly could have happened, or he had Amorayim, meaning he had people repeating, right, like shouting, like a series of individuals spaced all the way back through the crowd that would repeat what he said. At any rate, he would say it, and then the people en masse would say what? Did they repeat what Moses just said? No, says Rabbi Akiva. They would just say, I will sing unto the Lord, right? So, if we open the song at the sea from the daily prayers, which is here. Right, then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord, and they declared, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he is most exalted. Moses said that, and the people said, I will sing to the Lord. Moses continued, the horse with its rider he cast into the sea, and the people said, I will sing to the Lord. The might and retribution of God was my salvation. I will sing to the Lord. This is my God, and I will glorify him. The God of my father, and I will exalt him. I will sing to the Lord. You get it? You get that feeling? Imagine 2 million people saying, I will sing to the Lord. That must have been epic, That's why it was recorded in the Torah, and we recite it in our daily prayers to this day. So this is how Rabbi Akiva interprets that, right? Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, says, the Jewish people sang just like a minor boy reciting Hallel, and the congregation who hear him repeat after him all that he says, word for word, as hearing the recital of a minor is insufficient for fulfilling one's own obligation. So too, by the sea, Moses said, I will sing unto the Lord, and all the people said, I will sing unto the Lord. Moses said, for he is most exalted, and all the people said, for he is most exalted. The horse with its rider he cast into the sea. The horse with its rider he cast into the sea. Right? And everybody sang together, repeating every single word that Moses said. This is the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Rabbi Nehemiah says they sang this, a third option. Rabbi Nehemiah says they sang the song of the sea like a scribe, meaning in this case like a cantor, who recites aloud the introductory prayers and blessings before the Shema in the synagogue, as he begins by saying the first words of the blessing, and they repeat after him the initial words and continue reciting the rest of the Shema together with him in unison. So too in the Song of the Sea, Moses began, and then everyone recited the entire song together with him. How would they do that? Were they not learning it as he was giving it to them? Had they all learned it together and then they sang it together? Or perhaps, the whole thing was a miracle, so perhaps miraculously they were given knowledge what to sing so they could sing along with Moses. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to what do they disagree, right? So we have a view of this, what happened when that song was sung. One from Rabbi Akiva, that they just sang, I will sing unto the Lord, after each verse that Moses sang. Rabbi Eliezer, who said they repeated exactly what Moses had just said after him. And Rabbi Nehemiah, who says they knew what to sing and they sang it along with Moses. So the Gemara asks, with regard to what do they disagree? What is the underlying principle? And the Gemara answers that they disagree with regard to the interpretation of the verse. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song unto the Lord and said, saying. Right? Now, we've been together long enough that when you hear they sang, right? That Moses and the children of Israel sang this song unto the Lord and said, saying. So there's 3 verbs there regard to the words coming out of their mouths. Obviously, it could have just said, and they sang. So when the Torah says they sang and they said, saying, that's an invitation for the sages to interpret why these extra words are there. Rabbi Akiva holds that the word saying, which indicates that the people sang after Moses, is referring only to the first words of the song, which the people continually repeated, I will sing unto the Lord. Right, so saying in this case, the Hebrew is leomer, right? Lemor. And Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, holds that the word saying, lemor, is referring to every single word, as they would repeat after Moses every word that Moses had said. And Rabbi Nehemiah holds that the phrase, and they said, indicates that everyone recited the Song of the Sea together, and the word lemor, saying, means that Moses began singing the song first, and then the rest of the people sang the beginning after him, and they all continued in unison. Very much like in our minyan, we have a chazan, but he's not an operatic chazan that we just sit back and listen to him sing beautifully. He just starts the song. We figure out, we quickly hear what tune he's singing, and then we sing with him. And that's what Rabbi Nehemiah says is what Moses was doing with the people. The sages taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yosef HaGalili taught At the time that the Jewish people ascended from the sea, they resolved to sing a song of gratitude to God. And how did they recite the song? So now we have a fourth view. Not Rabbi Akiva, not Rabbi Eliezer, not Rabbi Nehemiah, but now what does Rabbi Yosei HaGalili teach? He says that what we learn from this passage, that the people resolved to sing a song of gratitude to God. And how did they recite this song? If a baby was lying on his mother's lap, or an infant was nursing from his mother's breast, once they saw the divine presence, right, this spectacular manifestation of God's presence, the pillar of fire by day, the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, the baby straightened his neck, and the infant dropped the breast from his mouth, and the baby recited, "This is my God, and I will glorify him." As it is stated, out of the mouths of babies and sucklings you have found strength. Psalm 8:3. Rabbi Meir would say, from where is it derived that even the fetuses in their mother's womb recited the song at the sea? As it is stated on page 31a, in full assemblies, bless God the Lord in full assemblies, bless God, the Lord, you that are from the source of Israel, Psalm 68:27, indicating that even children that are in the source, meaning in their mother's womb, blessed God when they gathered at the sea. If there's a little skeptical bone in your body twitching, like, oh, come on, the fetuses in their mother's wombs were singing, but you're going to accept that the sea parted and 2 million people walked through on dry land? The entire event was miraculous. Why shouldn't the fetuses in their mother's womb be singing this song too? After all, we have a tradition that when you were a fetus in your mother's womb, an angel came and taught you the entire Torah. And then just before you were born, the angel touched you right here, and that's what this little groove above your lip is, and caused you to forget what you had learned. But in that absolutely pure state, before you even came into the world, where you were an absolute tabula rasa, right? Like a blank blackboard that could learn anything, you were capable of learning the entire Torah. You forgot it because you can't come into the world and be a baby and function as a baby knowing all that Torah. But when you learn Torah later in your life, it's like coming home. It's not really learning it for the first time. It's like remembering what you once learned. Likewise, the fetus is capable of singing when it perceives what's going on outside of its mother's womb, which on that day, and only that day, acquired a crystal-like transparency, so that the fetuses could see what was going on, and they were singing in their mother's wombs. And the Gemara asks, but the fetuses could not see, so how could they have honestly said, "This is my God and I will glorify him"? And Rabbi Tanchum says their mother's stomach was transformed for them like luminous crystal, and they saw through it. On that same day, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus, back to our Mishna here in chapter 5, taught that Job served the Holy One, blessed be he, only out of love. Right? Remember, all these different, seemingly disparate subjects were taught on that day that Elazar ben Azariah threw open the doors of the study hall. So this is a different teaching now. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus, who we learned only speaks in this particular Mishnah here in chapter 5 of Tractate Sotah, not elsewhere in the Talmud. Some say that he was the brother of Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, but that is not confirmed. So on that same day, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus taught that Job, right from the book of Job, served the Holy One, blessed be he, only out of love. As it is stated, Job 13:15, though he, God, will slay me, still I will trust in him. Him in Hebrew is lo, right? But lo can also mean no. So that opens this verse up to two different meanings. The Mishnah continues that the word law in the verse is ambiguous as to whether it is indicative of Job expressing his yearning for God or his lack of yearning thereof. So the Gemara asks, let us see whether this word law is written lamed aleph, and therefore its meaning is I will not trust, or whether it is written lamed vav, according to which its meaning is I trust in him, right? I trust not is Lamed Aleph, or I trust in him, God, which would be Lamed Vav. Now the Gemara counters, but is it true that anywhere that the word law is written Lamed Aleph, its meaning is not negative? If that is so, then in the verse Isaiah 63:9, in all their affliction, he, God, was afflicted. Lo, right? He was afflicted. Where the word law is written Lamed Aleph, meaning that God shares our suffering with us, not God does not share our suffering. So too, does it mean not? That God was not afflicted in the affliction of the Jewish people? And if you would say that indeed that is the meaning of the verse in Isaiah, but isn't it written in the continuation of that same verse? And the angel of his presence saved them, which clearly indicates that God was concerned with their afflictions. So evidently the word law in that verse means in all their afflictions, he, law, was afflicted. And it's spelled in the same way that you just said means negative, like not as opposed to him. So rather, is it not clear that the Lamed Aleph sometimes indicates this and sometimes indicates that? Therefore, the Mishnah had to derive the proper meaning of the word from another verse. It is taught in a Baraisa, the Tosefta 6:1, that Rabbi Meir says it is stated with regard to Job that he was God-fearing. And it is stated with regard to Abraham, our patriarch, that he was God-fearing. Now, just as the description of God-fearing, which is stated with regard to Abraham, is referring to Abraham's fearing God out of love, so too the description God-fearing that is stated with regard to Job indicates that Job feared God out of love. Now, usually we kind of set these up as opposites. Are you doing God's will because you love God? Or are you doing God's will because you're afraid of God, right? You're going to do what he told us to do because you're afraid of the punishment and the consequences that will ensue if you don't do it. Or are you going to do it because you have developed in yourself, you have cultivated, and you have come to feel an honest emotion of love for God, and you just want to do what he told us to do because he said so, and you want to just give back to God by doing his will, right? Which is it? Here we're shown that, well, they're not so separate. They can go together. Why shouldn't they go together? Right? And Abraham, who was absolutely smitten with God, loved God, adored God, and that love of God brought him to also be a God-fearing person. What does that mean? It means that in developing that love for God and gratitude and just, trying to bring other people. He would feed people. He was the ultimate hospitality master, just always giving people, inviting them in to eat. And then when they would thank him for the hospitality they had received, he would say, oh, this is not from me. This is from the master of the world, the creator of the world, the one and only God. This in a time when everyone thought there were multiple gods. And everyone said, no, there's only one God. He's given me everything. And what I share with you comes from him. And that's how he brought others to love and fear God. But so with Abraham, because he came to know God out of love, then as he learned more about God, his fear of God, a better translation of that fear in that context is awe, right? Abraham just became awed by God. And it's funny that we're learning this today just because, I don't know, I was wasting a little time earlier and watching a TikTok video. And the rock and roll star, Alice Cooper, if you remember him from the 70s, he's still around. And he was doing an interview and he was saying that he came to God. He's a very religious person. And he came to God through fear of God. Because he was realizing that living a life out of control, that there would be real consequences, and perhaps, not in this world, then in the next world. And out of fear of God, he started to toe the line. And as he started to toe the line, he came to love God, right? So the two can go together, and you can come at the fear through love, or you could come at the love through fear, but you can feel both. Now the Gemara asks, and with regard to Abraham himself, from where do we derive that he acted out of a sense of love? How do we know that? As it is written, the offspring of Abraham who loved me. Isaiah 41:8. And the Gemara asks, what difference is there between one, and I'm going a little further into page 31 just because we're going to finish chapter 5 right now, but I am almost done, so get your questions and comments in. The Gemara asks, what difference is there between one who performs mitzvahs, commandments, out of love, and one who performs mitzvahs out of fear? The Gemara answers, there is that which was taught in Baraisa from Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says, greater is the one who performs mitzvahs out of love than one who performs mitzvahs out of fear. As with regard to this one who acts out of fear, his merits endure for 1,000 generations. Well, that sounds pretty good. But with regard to the one who serves God out of love, his merits endure for 2,000 generations. Proof of this assertion, here it is written, and showing mercy unto thousands, plural, of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Exodus 20, verse 5, indicating that merits can last for thousands of generations for those who act out of love. And there it is written, Deuteronomy 7:9, know therefore that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps the covenant and mercy with those who love him and keep his commandments for 1,000 generations. Now, the first verse indicates that those who act out of love retain their merits for thousands of generations, whereas the second verse, which mentions only 1,000 generations of merit, is referring to the merits of those who keep God's commandments out of fear. And the Gemara asks, but there also in the second verse it is written, the faithful God who keeps the covenant and mercy with those who love him and keep his commandments for 1,000 generations. So why is the verse interpreted specifically with regard to those who worship God out of fear, and yet it is written that they keep his mitzvahs out of love? Both types of people seem to be indicated in both verses. And the Gemara answers, that verse which mentions 1,000 generations is understood as referring to that which is adjacent to it. The phrase for 1,000 generations is understood as referring to those who perform mitzvahs out of fear, as it is written immediately preceding the phrase, and keep his commandments, which does not mention love. And this verse, which mentions plural, thousands of generations, is understood as referring to that which is adjacent to it, unto thousands of generations of those who love me, says God. So it happened that there were these two students who were sitting before Rava, and one said to him, it was read to me in my dream, how abundant is your goodness, which you have laid up for those who fear you. Psalms 31:20. And the other student said to Rava, it was read to me in my dream, so shall all those who take refuge in you rejoice. They will forever shout for joy, and you will shelter them. Let them also who love your name exult in you. Psalm 5:12. And Rava said to the two students, you are both completely righteous sages. One sage, the second dreamer, serves God out of love, and one sage, the first dreamer, serves God out of fear, and each sage's dream corresponded to his manner of serving God, and each was equally righteous. So whether you come to serve God because you fear the consequences that will ensue if you don't, or whether you come to serve God because you're so grateful and you acknowledge the wondrous goodness of God and you love him as you're commanded to do, either way is fine as long as you do God's will, says Rava. Okay, and that concludes chapter 5. With God's help, when we begin tomorrow night, Monday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, we'll open chapter 6. Let's just see if we've got any comments or questions on page 30 here in Tractate Sotah. Tom, is there sacrificial food that is not teruma? Yeah, teruma is not sacrificial food. Sacrificial food is like a sin offering, right? That which part of it goes up on the altar, part of it is eaten by the priests, or a peace offering. Part of it goes up on the altar, part of it is eaten by the owner. That's what sacrificial food is. Tom, this is after the fact, temple teachings that came after destruction. How did the people live when the temple was standing with regard to how many cubits? In other words, were they observing the Sabbath Techum while the temple was standing? It's a great question. I don't know. I mean, in other words, you're saying that, well, it seems like Rabbi Akiva and the other sages were still debating this. So what were they doing before? Probably there was some kind of a ruling on this and, it was not fully expanded upon. It might have evolved a little bit later, but they had to know how to live. So, the elders of that generation must have told them. Karen, were the Levitical cities the same as the cities of refuge? I believe that the cities of refuge were Levitical cities, but there were other cities that were Levitical cities that were not necessarily cities of refuge. I could definitely be wrong on that. That's my impression as I remember it now. I don't have the answer on the tip of my tongue. Bet, how did they define love in those days? I mean, if you're talking about love of God, I think, we've been talking about that. If you're talking about romantic love, I think it's not that different than today, right? They felt romantic love. You look at the Song of Songs, there's definitely, a use of language that is very similar to our ideas of romantic love. The difference was that romantic love was not the be-all, end-all reason of why marriages would be created. And honestly, romantic love as the main motivation for marriage, that's a very modern idea. For most of the history of humanity, there were a lot of other factors that went into a marriage. They were arranged by the parents, they were arranged by the community. There were all kinds of things involved on who was going to marry who, where the husband and wife didn't necessarily have that much choice in the matter. But what the community and what the parents and the community would arrange is that people with similar values were matched together. And when you have people of similar values building a home together, the love will grow. Learn more about that. Watch Fiddler on the Roof. Right, the Tevye and his wife discussing, he said, "Do you love me?" "Do I love you?" Of course they love each other, but they built that love on a foundation of shared values. That's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Monday, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.